this topic of how do we awaken our vast potential and how do we do it together is such a good question, and it's so relevant for our time. And I want to just give you all a little sense of how vast that potential really is. Let's just start off with what we think, what we consciously think. Most people, when we are actively thinking in our daily waking life, we're maybe only consciously aware of just, some people say 10%, that's not a hard and fast number, but the tip of the iceberg. What we're consciously aware of is just the tip of the iceberg. And yet our brain is taking in data and information from our senses and our environment, from our higher consciousness, from spirit. It's taking in all this information and it's processing it, but most of that is happening beneath the surface of our awareness. Now, what would happen if we could just start to tap into maybe 20% awareness or 30% awareness and start expanding into a level of conscious awareness of higher functions or deeper functions that are going on within our brain? So that's just talking our brain capacity. Now, we also actively only use, or science is only really aware of, maybe somewhere between 3 to 5% of our DNA, that 3 to 5% of our DNA is actively used to build the proteins of our body and the instruction code for the genetic sequence. But then there's this other 95 to 97% that they call introns, or what they call non-coding DNA, that is they're realizing is actually very important, but they just don't understand it. So if our biological understanding of the DNA, which is the blueprint of who we are, is we're only really tapping into understanding about 3 to 5% of it, the rest of that DNA is like, we have so much potential to awaken to in terms of what is our blueprint. And it is potential that we have yet to activate some of it within us. Maybe it's just dormant. It's just, we have, for example, genetic codes within our DNA that could create regeneration from within our own cells, just like a salamander can regrow its tail, for example. That potential is within us. Super immunity potentials within us, greater awareness of all of our senses and our perceptions is within us. You can imagine, for example, some of your superhero movies, like maybe Superman with X-ray vision, or the super strength or super speed. We have a sense of that archetypally. We have that sense of there is more potential within us that's yet to be awakened. And some of the movies that have been coming out really try to depict some of this, whether we're talking from X-Men and our evolution into new abilities, or like Lucy, and just sort of finding ways to tap into it. But I like what Greg Braden said earlier, which is that rather than trying to hack the body with technology, like implanting chips into our brains so that we can be hooked up into the cloud and the internet, and having brain and internet interfacing, we can already tap into that potential through the collective consciousness, through the morphogenetic field. There's huge amount of potential that we have yet to tap into. Another thing to consider is that if we just take our 5 senses, for example, what we see, we call the visible light spectrum. And yet we know from science that visible light spectrum that we can see with our eyes is just a small sliver of a much greater electromagnetic spectrum. It's just 1%, right? So we're only seeing 1% of the physical reality around us. And then we're only consciously processing about 10% of that 1%. So now we're talking, 0.1% of the physical reality around us. And that's just through our eyes. You have similar ranges through what we feel, what we smell, what we taste, what we can hear. You can hear maybe more, a broader spectrum than what you can see, which is why I love that we're bringing music into this experience to help create, a unified effect, a unified field. Now, the other big key to all of this is, well, how do we tap into that, right? If we can awaken that potential, how can we awaken it? So this is where I feel that modern science and the sort of quantum paradigm is really important, because there is this key. It's a really important key, and it's a fairly simple key to remember, and it's called coherence. And this is something that we are trying to achieve here, is coherence. How can we achieve that within ourselves? How can we achieve that collectively? How can we achieve that globally? And, so we have these coherence opportunities through things like entrainment. I'm not sure who's, is that my feedback or is that someone else? Sorry, oh, okay.
Well, Dr. Bulut,
Yes.
if you pull your microphone up a little bit, we're getting the scratchy sound.
Oh,
or if
okay.
you even hold, yeah, there you go. If you'd hold
I'll try holding it, no problem.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So when we can achieve a state of coherence within ourselves, let's just take, for example, brain coherence. We have all these different frequencies and energies, vibrational levels happening within our brain. Well, usually it's very stochastic or not so harmonized. But when you can start to bring more harmonization between the hemispheres of the brain and from the cortex and down, rather than just only operating in the cortex, then we start to reach a more coherent state. So it's a harmonic state. Everything is in sync. All levels are integrating and working together. You can even then start to work from brain to heart coherence, right? By focusing on breath work, by focusing on gratitude, by focusing, doing meditation. These are tools, ancient spiritual tools that have been on the planet for thousands of years. But now today, modern science is starting to recognize the benefits that they actually have, how it does help us to come into a greater state of coherence. And even all the way down to the DNA, it's been shown. For example, the HeartMath Institute has done some studies that show that when we achieve a state of heart coherence, it actually is communicating with our DNA, because when we're experiencing states of gratitude, of love, of joy, and real positive energy, that causes the DNA coil to relax and to sort of unwind or loosen its DNA spiral, so that the genes or the genetic potential that's stored within it can be more accessible and more expressed. Whereas on the other hand, when we experience things like fear and stress and anger and tension, and there's a lot of that going on in our world today, that is when the DNA will actually tighten its coil and less of our genetic potential becomes accessible to be expressed or accessed. Now, we have huge potential within us, but this state of coherence is really important for us to start accessing more of that state. So having a practice of meditation, having a practice of working, with music and chants and so forth to bring yourself into a really coherent state, practicing gratitude, practicing really looking at things from a positive mindset versus negativity or judgment or opinion, really working with some form of spiritual practice, whether that's rituals, prayer, meditation, qigong, any of these types of practices will support you. And then we need to work on how do we do that together? So through entraining, we can really work with together, by coming into states of being together and achieving that entrainment where we're all in resonance and we're all focused on the same intention, where we're all, harmonizing into the same frequencies through collective coherence, which is what we really need to achieve that global shift, that critical mass within the collective consciousness. When we can awaken to that, then that is when we will really be able to help create a spontaneous awakening for the whole of humanity. And it's just a small percentage, maybe 3% of the global population is needed to start coming into that coherent state, maybe even less. Some people say 1%, some people say the square root of 1%. I hope it's the square root of 1%, because then we really have an accessible range of people that we can bring into this kind of state of coherence. but we also need to sustain that. So it's not just about achieving it in a one-time intention, or meditation experience where a bunch of people gather together. We have to sustain it in our lives. And that's the last thing I want to say is just let's create a way of life that is a greater coherence. And when we can sustain that in our lives together, and that, there are thousands of people that start to do that and start to live that way of life, that is when the collective can start to entrain up to those higher frequencies and awarenesses. So that's about all I have time for, I think, right now. But that, I just wanted to send that out there in terms of our global possibilities, our personal possibilities and potential, and that we can awaken. Oh yes, and this is one of the best methods that I personally have found to start that awakening process at an individual level is through something called the life activation, which I received back in 2001, and it completely changed my life. And then I followed that with initiation into the ancient mystery school tradition. So if that's something that you want to experience, it is done as a one-on-one session. There's practitioners all over the world who are trained in how to conduct this life activation session. It will start to awaken your spiritual blueprints, your DNA, and you can contact us at teresabuller.com, and we will be more than happy to get you connected to a local practitioner near you.
I'm going to unmute. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Let's stay on Teresa just for a moment, and we need to bring you into a global coherence pulse. Everything that you just said is exactly what that initiative is all about. So I'll definitely be in touch. I would love to have you come on and support the community that's growing around that and really practicing and building those islands of coherence.
That sounds wonderful, Teresa. Thank you.